We got the numbers. What if Michael Jordan didn't take 5 years off? Where would that leave him in every statistical category amongst the all-time greats? Everybody knows MJ took almost 2 full seasons off, then 3 seasons from 98 to 2001 for a temporary retirement. So how many games did he actually miss, excluding the 32 games for the 98-99 strike season?
Right. So in 93-94 season, he missed a full 82 games. And then in 94-95, he missed 65 because he came back for 17 games before the playoffs started. So in total, he missed 147 games for baseball. Then with retirement, he took off 3 full seasons. So typically that'd be 246 games. Like you said, there was the strike, which cut the 82 games down to 50. That's an extenuating circumstance. We're not taking that into consideration here. So we're just going to say 246 games for retirement, 147 for baseball. That's just under 400 games he missed in total.
Wow, so that's a lot of stats left on the table. So if MJ played in those 393 games, what do you think those numbers would look like?
Yeah, so we broke this down 2 ways. One is we took his career average and applied it to those 393 games. The other thing we did is when he took the baseball time off, we took his average before, the year before, and his average the year after, took the average of that and applied it to those baseball games. And then we did the same thing with retirement.
It's such a sin because he was in the prime of his career, 30, 31 years old. And let's not forget, the 3 years before baseball, he won 3 rings. The 3 years when he got back, he won 3 rings. We already talked about if he would have won 8 in a row, and we did a separate video about that on the channels. Go check that out. But anyway, back to the topic at hand. You ran the numbers. Tell us what they look like. With those stats, where would he be on the all-time list in all those statistical categories that we talked about?
Let's just start with just 147 games from baseball. If you add in those numbers and whether you put the career average or the average around that's reflective of that period in time, he'd be 4th on the all-time scoring list, 3rd all-time in rebounds by a guard, 2nd all-time in steals, 1st all-time in block shots by a guard, and then 30th to 32nd in assists. And mind you, there's not that many, I don't know how many shooting guards, but there's not a lot of shooting guards in the top 30. So he'd be at the head of that list if you're talking about guys that primarily played at the 2.
Now, what if you just do the 3 retirement years, not the baseball years?
Just looking at the retirement, that's 246 games. Same thing. 2nd all-time in points, 2nd all-time in rebounds by a guard, still 2nd all-time in steals, 1st all-time in blocks by a guard, and then he's all the way up to 20th to 23rd all-time in assists, depending which average you use.
All right, so that puts him 2nd all-time in scoring behind LeBron, but ahead of Kareem. So how many ahead of Kareem and how many behind LeBron?
Okay, so if you do the career average, he'd be about 1,200 points ahead of Kareem and about 500 behind LeBron. But if you used the more accurate average for the specific periods of time when he took the breaks, he'd be about 250 ahead of Kareem and about 1,400 behind LeBron.
All right, so the real question, combine both periods together. Where's that put him?
Okay, so he played all those 393 games, which, yes, it's a stretch. He did miss games, but it's not as much of a stretch as people might think because he did play 80 games a year other than year 2. It would have brought his career total of games to 1,465 games. He'd be 1st in points with somewhere between 43 to 44,000 points. LeBron right now is a little over 40,000, so he'd be about 3 to 4,000 over LeBron's current total. In rebounds by a guard, he would have been 1st. The caveat there, of course, is back then he was really a guard. There are guys that were designated guards, forward centers. You have a little bit less of that today. Is LeBron a guard? But if you're just looking at a traditional 1 or 2, he'd be 1st. In steals, if you take his career average, he would actually just beat out Stockton, which is pretty impressive because that record is crazy. Stockton is so far ahead, number 2, Jason Kidd. If you take his other average, which I'd say is more accurate, he'd be close, but he'd still be in 2nd. In blocks by a guard, again, a little bit of a caveat here, he'd be 1st by about 150 blocks over D Wade. And then on the assist list, he'd be all the way up to top 14 or 15 all time, which is very good for a guy that, you know, the narrative is that he didn't pass the ball.
All right, and I know you looked at this. LeBron is averaging 25.5 points per game this season. How many more games would he have needed to catch Jordan if Jordan hit the mark you were just talking about?
Yeah, so with the lower estimate, he would need 117 more games. So that's the remainder of this season plus another 1.25 season, another 104 games.
All right, and what about catching the higher estimate?
Then he would need 154 games or almost 2 full seasons at that average.
All right, look, top to bottom, those numbers are crazy. And he's also tied for first all time with 9 first team all defensive team honors. And he got those while winning 10 scoring titles.
And while making 6 trips to the finals and winning all 6.
As far as I'm concerned, this alone, even without another ring, would absolutely end the GOAT convo.
I think so. I think the shame of it is that we'll never actually know. Obviously, this is hypotheticals. We're having some fun with it, with extrapolating what the numbers might look like. But it is interesting to say, had he done that, there's a lot of what ifs here. He could have got hurt. Maybe wouldn't have played as many games each season if he didn't take that time off. The reality is, if you just apply averages and just kind of say, hey, what could have been, it's impressive, and it definitely ends that GOAT debate.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's safe to say he was playing 80 games. He was playing 82 games. And the seasons we're talking about, he was 30, 31 years old. He's young. He's in the prime. He could have very well put in those 82. But to me, there's one GOAT. MJ's the GOAT. He was the GOAT. He is the GOAT. He's going to continue to be the GOAT. MJ is just up there.